Hello everyone and welcome back to another Metalstorm video. Today I'm going to be covering everything you need to know about the KF-21 Boramae, the newest jet to come to Metalstorm. Now, in this video I'm going to be covering the stats of the KF-21, including how it compares to other jets of the same class, strategies you can use in live matches, and all the new mechanics that came along with the KF-21. That is the drone and how to use it. So with that out of the way, let's get right into it. I'm going to show you guys the level 20 stats. So at level 20, the gun does 489 damage per second. And your radar missiles do 160 damage. Your IRs do 150 damage. And the jet itself has 260 hit points. Top speed, 1400 kilometers per hour. Acceleration, 45 meters per second. Turn rate, 37 degrees. Ideal turning speed, 774 kilometers per hour, and you get 16 seconds of afterburner fuel. The gun does not have armor piercing, and it has an overheat time of 4.72 seconds, with a spin-up time of 0.6 seconds. Ideal range, 0.4 kilometers, and the reticle range, 0.9 kilometers. That's when the reticle appears on whatever jet you're firing at. For the traits, of course, you get your loyal wingman drone. A loyal wingman drone spawns with you and flies by your side. It is armed with 2 long-range radar-guided missiles, and the drone has 2 modes toggled via the wing sweep button. Mode 1, Ammo. When locking and firing your long-range missiles, your drone will fire first, preserving your ammo. And then for mode 2, you have Defender. Your drone puts itself between you and the nearest incoming missile, saving you from taking the hit. So in Defender mode, it performs similar to the ADV's decoy. If your drone dies, it will respawn once you do sufficient damage, or on your next respawn. So the drone does recharge over time, but it recharges faster if you earn a kill. If you die and respawn, the drone respawns with you. One thing I would also like to point out is, if you run out of your own radar missiles and the drone respawns, you also get those 2 radar missiles back with the drone, if it was in ammo mode. Alright, now for the stats in comparison to other medium fighters. For the first jet, we have the F-100 Super Sabre. Now, in comparison to the F-100, the KF-21 does have less HP at max level. The F-100 would have 270, but the KF-21 is faster than the F-100. 1400 versus 1299 kilometers per hour. They have the same acceleration, and the KF-21 does turn a lot quicker than the F-100 by 2 degrees. Although the F-100 does have a lower ideal turning speed, with the same amount of afterburner fuel. It goes without saying that the KF-21 outranges the F-100 in terms of missiles, but the F-100 does have rockets which do a considerable amount of damage. It's also worth noting that the KF-21 does outdamage the F-100's gun by 67 damage. The F-100 does 422 damage at max level. On to the next medium fighter. Now, the Draken does have higher hit points at max level than the KF-21, 290, while the KF-21 has 260. However, the KF-21 does outdamage the J-35 The Draken does 322 damage at max level. The J-35's manual missiles also do 20 more damage than the KF-21's radar missiles at max level. Same amount of damage for the IRs at 150. The Draken is slower by 50 kilometers per hour, but it has higher acceleration by 5 meters per second. The Draken also has a similar turn rate to the KF-21, while also having a lower ideal turn speed and 15 seconds of afterburner fuel. This likely means that the J-35 will be able to outturn the KF-21 since it will be able to achieve its ideal turning speed a lot quicker than the KF-21, higher acceleration, and lower ideal turning speed. The J-35 does have delta wing braking to its advantage. So this is one jet you definitely have to look out for when you're playing the KF-21. The J-35 can absolutely compete with you. For the next medium fighter on our list, we have the F-106 Delta Dart. At max level, the F-106's manuals do 170 damage, so that's 10 more damage than the KF-21's radar missiles. And the cannon on the F-106 does 445 damage. That's still less than the KF-21. For speed, the F-106 is faster than the KF-21 by 50 kilometers per hour, with a slower acceleration rate at 40 meters per second. However, the F-106 does have a higher turn rate at 38 degrees per second versus the KF-21's 37 degrees per second. The F-106 also has a lower ideal turning speed than the KF-21 at 558 kilometers per hour, with 12 seconds of afterburner fuel further extended by drop tanks, giving it another 7 seconds. It's also important to note that the F-106 can fly faster between the altitudes of 2,000 and 3,500 meters. So yes, the F-106 can definitely outspeed the KF-21. Very formidable jet that you will have to look out for. For the next medium fighter on the list, we have the JA-37 Viggen. Now, at max level, the Viggen's manual missiles do 170 damage, so that's 10 more damage than the KF-21's radar missiles. For the cannons, they only do 280 damage, which is significantly less than the KF-21 at 489 damage per second. At max level, the Viggen has 270 hit points, which is still 10 hit points higher than the KF-21. I also forgot to mention that at max level, the F-106 has 300 hit points, so that's 40 more hit points than the KF-21. Now for the other stats, the Viggen has the same top speed as the KF-21, same acceleration, however a lower turn rate at 34 degrees per second, still a lower ideal turning speed at 612 kilometers per second, with the same afterburner fuel time at 16 seconds. The Viggen also has the cruising altitude trait, which means it can fly faster between the altitudes of 2,000 and 3,000 meters. The Viggen also has a much greater range on the gun, so I would highly discourage going head-on with the Viggen, unless you absolutely have to. The Viggen will outrange you with its cannons, so do keep that in mind. For the next medium fighter on our list, the MiG-29 Fulcrum. I do not have the Fulcrum unlocked, however, I can still tell you the stats from the wiki. At max level, the MiG-29 has 260 hit points, so that's the same as the KF-21. And At max level, the cannons on the MiG-29 do 340 damage per second, so that is still lower than the KF-21's 389 damage. With that said, I still would not recommend going head-on with the MiG-29 because it does have a greater ideal range on its cannons and a greater range on the reticle. So it appears before yours can, and it does max damage at a further range than you can. For the weapon stats, the manual missiles on the MiG-29 will do 170 damage compared to the KF-21's 160 damage on its radars. In terms of top speed, the KF-21 is faster than the MiG-29 with the same acceleration, and the KF-21 does have a greater turn rate than the MiG-29 at 37 degrees versus the MiG-29's 36 degrees. The MiG-29 also has a significantly higher ideal turning speed at 828 kilometers per hour with only 11 seconds of afterburner fuel. However, the MiG-29 also gets a drop tank, which gives it 7 extra seconds of afterburner fuel. On to the J-10 Firebird. Now, at max level, the J-10 has 290 hit points versus the KF-21's 260. For the cannons on the J-10, at max level, the J-10 does 230 damage per second, so that is lower than the KF-21, but the J-10 does have a longer ideal range and reticular range. Once again, we have the manuals on the J-10 doing 170 damage compared to the KF-21's 160 damage on its radar missiles. I think it's safe to assume that all the jets with manual missiles will do more damage than the KF-21's radar missiles. The J-10 is slower than the KF-21 at 1,299 kilometers per hour. However, it does have greater acceleration at 50 meters per second, while having the same turn rate at 37 degrees. The J-10's ideal turning speed is greater than that of the KF-21 at 792 kilometers per hour versus the KF-21's 774 kilometers per hour. However, both jets do have the same amount of afterburner fuel time at 16 seconds. Though the J-10 may be lacking in stats in comparison to the KF-21, the J-10 is not to be underestimated because it also has the delta wing trait and look and shoot, which means the J-10 can use the camera padlock feature and fire its missiles off bore, so at an offset. For our next medium fighter, we have the FA-18 Hornet. Now the Hornet does have 300 hit points at max level, and its cannons will do 446 damage per second at max level. With a similar ideal range and reticle range as the KF-21, with a longer spin-up time of 0.8 seconds. Meanwhile, the KF-21 has a spin-up time of 0.6 seconds on its gun. The FA-18 does have a longer overheat time, however, at 5.95 seconds. No armor piercing. In terms of speed, the KF-21 is faster than the FA-18, and the Hornet does accelerate slower at 40 meters per second, with a lower turn rate of 35 degrees per second. Meanwhile, the KF-21 has 37 degrees per second. With that said, the FA-18 does have a lower ideal turning speed at 648 kilometers per hour, with 15 seconds of afterburner fuel. Alright, now for the next medium fighter, the M2K. At level 20, the M2K's manual missiles, hunter missiles, do 190 damage, and its IRs do 160 damage. So the M2K's Hunter missiles do 30 more damage than the KF-21's radar missiles, and the IRs do 10 more damage than its radar missiles. For the cannons, the M2K does 768 damage. The M2K has a top speed of 1450 kilometers per hour, so that's 50 kilometers faster than the KF-21, with an acceleration of 55 meters per second, also greater than the KF-21's. The turn rate of 39 degrees, that's 2 degrees more than the KF-21, and an ideal turning speed of 810 kilometers per hour, also greater than the KF-21's ideal turning speed. The M2K does bleed speed very quickly in turns, and it has a really short afterburner fuel time of 12 seconds, although this can be increased by the drop tanks, which gives it an extra 8 seconds of afterburner fuel. Only has 2 flares. With the passive, it also has the gunslinger flares, so each kill it regains a flare. I suppose the anti-radar trap special ability could help it, but once it uses its special ability, then it's pretty easy to take down if you catch it out in the open. That's just my thoughts on it. It's also worth noting that the M2K also has the cruising altitude trait, which means it can fly faster between the altitudes of 1500 and 3000 meters. And it also has delta wing braking to its advantage. So it can absolutely outturn the KF-21 if you ever end up in a dogfight. So that's one thing to look out for. Now for the next medium fighter, the Rafale F3R, also known as the RAF. Now at max level, the RAF has 260 HP. And I forgot to mention that at level 20, the M2K also has 260 hit points. So that's the same as the KF-21 at max level. The RAF's missiles do 160 damage at max level, and the cannons do 384 damage at max level. So that's still less than the KF-21, although its IR missiles do 10 more damage than the KF-21. For speed, the RAF has a top speed of 1350 kilometers per hour with the same acceleration as the KF-21 with a greater turning rate of 39 degrees. Ideal turning speed 792 kilometers per hour, 13 seconds of afterburner fuel. One thing that is especially worth noting is the RAF's special ability, the Arc Pulse. The RAF can absolutely counter the KF-21 with its special ability. And with the look and shoot trait, if you're within that lock cone, then the RAF can still fire at you. So the RAF can absolutely take you down. The Typhoon FGR4 will be covering the Typhoon FGR4. Let me just bring up the stats from the wiki. At max level, the Typhoon has a HP pool of 270 hit points. At max level, the Typhoon's cannons do 236 damage with high armor piercing. So even though the damage is less than the KF-21's, it makes up for it with high armor piercing. I do not recommend going head on with the Typhoon. For its other stats, the Typhoon has a top speed of 1450 kilometers per hour, so that's 50 more than the KF-21. Same acceleration at 45 meters per second with a higher turning rate of 39 degrees. And quite similar ideal turning speed at 738. Though the KF-21's ideal turning speed is higher at 774 kilometers per hour. The Typhoon has an afterburner fuel time of 14 seconds, so that's 2 seconds less than the KF-21. At max level, the Typhoon's radar missiles do 160 damage, so that is the same as the KF-21. Same thing with the IRs. At max level, the Typhoon's IRs do 150 damage, which is the same as the KF-21's IRs. Typhoon also has 4 flares, so that's 1 extra over the KF-21, and the cruising altitude trait, which means it flies faster between the altitudes of 2,000 and 3,000 meters. So the Typhoon can outspeed the KF-21. Now, for the last medium fighter, the F-35 Lightning. At max level, the F-35's cannon does 370 damage with high armor piercing. However, it is limited by the ammo it carries, which is 400. The radar missiles do the same amount as the KF-21 at 160 damage. But the F-35 does have stealth to its advantage. For the top speed, the F-35 has a top speed of 1,249 kilometers per hour, same acceleration as the KF-21 at 45 meters per second, and a higher turn rate by 1 degree, 38 degrees per second. However, it does have the same ideal turning speed at 774 kilometers per hour, with less afterburner fuel at 14 seconds. So, that's all the medium fighters covered. And now I can move on to showing you guys some strategies and how you can use the drone in combat. Alright, so this match here, I was flying with Azrael, a friend of mine. And I think it's a good example of one of the ways you can fly the KF-21. Basically, what you want to do is gain some altitude and fire off your missiles. Your drone comes with 2 extra radar missiles, so you can get those off quickly and then dive back down for cover. You can also send the drone forward to draw fire, so that will give you a few extra seconds to launch both your missiles and then retreat. That's the strategy I like to use anyway. Keep in mind that it's better to put your drone in defensive mode rather than use it to draw fire when at close range. It won't be as effective. So it's better to keep it in defensive mode. To compensate for the turning on the KF-21, I like to add a bit of vertical to my maneuvers, which usually allows me to cut into another jet's turn circle. It's very important that you maintain your speed in the KF-21. You never want to dip below your ideal turning speed. However, if you do, the KF-21 is forgiving enough that when you use the afterburners, it quickly accelerates you to your ideal turning speed. So while it's not recommended, it punishes you a lot less compared to other jets. Say you were fighting a delta wing, and they use delta wing braking against you and slow down rapidly. You could also use your air brakes as well and slow down to prevent yourself from overshooting. And once you do that, you're able to quickly accelerate again back to your ideal turning speed. One thing I do want to implore you guys to practice is using your drone. So you use your special ability key. For me, on PC, it's my shift button. And for the wing sweep button, that controls your drone's mode. For me, it's caps lock on PC. So whenever your drone is in ammo mode, you get 2 extra radar missiles. So practice firing off those first, and then you use your wing sweep button to switch your drone to defensive mode. And what that does is, it acts as a decoy. If you were about to get hit by a missile, instead, the drone would get hit. It would fly into the path of the missile, preventing you from taking the direct hit. So it works similar to the ADV's decoy. So you guys should really get into the habit of doing that. Once you fire off your 2 extra missiles, switch your drone to defensive mode. As you can tell by how the match is going, they were really pressuring us, especially in our spawn. There was very little time to react. Whenever one died, another one would just fly over and you would be back into another engagement. Usually I would fire my 2 missiles and immediately defend, but I kept on the offensive there. Did a simple roll while flaring to dodge that missile, and I was back to shooting missiles. This match isn't exactly the perfect example of how you can use the KF-21, but it is a good one. I will be making a dedicated video on how you can use the KF-21 in air superiority and priority target specifically, along with some tips for TDM. This was just to give you guys a little introduction on some of the tips that you can use, as well as how to operate the drone. At this point, the video is already 26 minutes long, so I'm going to cut it short here, and then I will follow up with a few other videos and give you guys some more detailed tips on how you can use your drone in TDM, air sup, and priority target. I'm sorry I wasn't able to provide you guys with all the tips I wanted to share, but if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe to support the channel. I may live stream after uploading this video. If not, then I will live stream on the weekend. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.